Again, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Just to remind you that this training is being recorded and that you will all be sent a link to this training. I'd encourage you to put your questions into the chat, please. And if you could keep the questions relevant to the section that we're dealing with. So this section now that I'm going to be dealing with is what I need you to do as Forcep officers and Forcep reps. We will have a break at 5 to 12 for 20 minutes. And then the next session that starts at 12:15 will deal with data breaches and the data subject rights, and then a conclusion as well. And there'll be a Q&A at the end of that. So if there's anything relevant in relation to that into this session, if you put it into the chats for questions, please. Now, just to say in relation to, I'm just going to cover a little bit in terms of what Forcep is obliged to do as a data controller and what we have done before I get into the nitty-gritty of this session. So as data controller, there's a piece in the legislation that talks about having privacy by design and privacy by default. So basically what that means is that if we're introducing a new system or the systems that we have already, we need to, as a matter of course, consider data protection and members' information in terms of security and all the obligations we have in relation from GDPR when we're doing something like that. So Solus, the new membership system that we've just discussed, is a prime example of that and a perfect example of that. So that when that was being introduced, I had to carry out with our advisors, because it was such a large job, a data protection impact assessment. We'd need to do due diligence on the organization that's coming in that we're going to be sharing our information with. Say, for instance, if we were transferring data outside of the EU, there's another whole process that we need to go through. There needs to be agreements in place. There needs to be all sorts of assessments done. So it can get really complicated and quite complex. So when we use third-party processors, we need to have all of those type of agreements in place. So we're quite clear about the standards that we need them to meet. And if they're using sub-processors, the requirements and the standards that those sub-processors are required to meet as well. I mentioned earlier that Forcep, as a data controller, is required to keep a host of records in terms of our data processing logs, in terms of data incidents, in terms of training, and it goes on, but we need to keep a lot of records. And obviously we're obliged to keep our members' information safe and secure. I'm obliged to report any data breaches. And just to say, when the Data Protection Commission deals with Forcep, they deal with Forcep corporate, but they see Forcep as Forcep HQ and all of our branches. So it doesn't matter whether it's Donegal branch or social protection branch. It's all considered Forcep, and if they get a complaint in or if there's a breach, it'll be me that they will deal with. So it's very important, and I'll reiterate this later, that if there is a data breach or if there is an issue, you need to report it to me, or if a member is looking for further information, you need to report it to me, because we need to keep a log of all of that. And because if there is an issue and the Data Protection Commission becomes involved, it'll be me that they will contact. So I need to be aware of anything that happens. I've mentioned earlier in relation to data protection impact assessments, they're basically a risk assessment. So you would do it in health and safety, we now do it in data protection, and then Forcep, because we deal with so much special categories of information, we're obliged to have a data protection officer, which we do have. And just to say, we have hired privacy specialists. We use their online platform, Privacy Engine's online platform, for training. We have appointed a data protection officer. We've rolled out numerous policies and procedures. There's ongoing training. And just in relation to training, before I forget to say it, I do also do, if a branch wants me to go along and do training for them, I do short sessions for that. And it has been asked, are we doing more training this year? So we're looking at that, but I think it probably will be appropriate once Solus is rolled out to branches that there'll be some GDPR training, something similar to this, but with more focus on SOLAS as well, once it's rolled out. We've improved security in terms of physical and soft security. And just to say that in the past year, we have a cybersecurity group that meets once a month and deals with issues in relation to generally everything technical in terms of security and hard security as well. So we're meeting this afternoon, and we also recently, just late last year, had a cybersecurity audit, and we're working our way towards meeting those recommendations. So it's work that's ongoing. It never stops, and it's something that we take extremely seriously within Forcep. So just to, in terms of what we need you to do as Forcep representatives and Forcep branch officers. And I want you to this is my little yardstick here, and I want you to ask yourself these two questions. If you're about to do something with a member's piece of information, and anyone who has done this training before will hear me harp on about my yardstick, but it's really important that if you're about to do something with a member's piece of information, ask yourself the question, if that was your information, if that was your data, would you be happy with it to be treated in that way? If the answer to that is yes, the chances are you're on the right track. If the answer to that is, oh, I'm not sure, or actually, no, I wouldn't be, well, then you need to stop. You need to reconsider. You need to either contact myself or contact the branch official or talk to somebody else who has experience, but you need to reconsider. And I would advise that you pick up the phone to myself or send me an email. The next part of that yardstick is, would you be surprised? And we talked earlier about you need to be transparent with members in terms of how you're going to use your information. And that's why Forcep would have the privacy notice on our website. An example of this would be, I bought a very fancy handbag for my daughter a few Christmases ago down in Kildare Village. And the sales assistant said to me, do you want to give me your email so that if anything happens to the bag, that you're covered and we have your information? Perfect. Shared my email address. And a couple of days later, I'm starting to get marketing emails from that organization. Now, I don't want marketing emails, didn't agree to have marketing emails. That's what I mean by, are you surprised? In that instance, I didn't do anything about it, but that's just an example of, you know, my information being used for a reason that I didn't agree with. Now, in terms of, and these are the bones of what I need you to do. So in terms of integrity and confidentiality, and the first one here, and there was a lot of questions on that before break, was forceprep.ie. So what forceprep.ie is, for those who don't know, is an email system that's based off the Office 365 platform. So it's basically linked into the Forcep system, so it's secure. And there are a number of reasons that we encourage you to use this. Now, Owen might want to come in and say something on this in a minute, but just to say, one, there are issues around having union information sitting on an employer's system. And if you read any employer's IT policy, somewhere in there will be a paragraph that says, if it's sitting on our system, it's ours and we have access to it. And that's protecting themselves in case their system is used in inappropriate ways. Okay, I'm not saying trade unions in inappropriate, but sometimes people can use systems in inappropriate ways, and that's their way of safeguarding that. Now, most employers are fantastic, and they won't, and they haven't gone into it, but if they needed to, they may well, they have the right to. And I've had employers who have been in a situation where they've had a data subject access request from a member of their staff trying to get access to Forcep information through their system. Okay, now we've successfully on that occasion been able to deal with it, but other unions haven't been so successful in that. So that's another reason why Forcep Rep is important. That and then from a very practical reason as well, taking data protection out of it, that if we need to deal or to contact our members, particularly in an emergency, the employers, if we're using employer systems, they can very quickly shut off our access. And experience would tell us that that's what they have done in the past when we've been in this dispute with an employer and we're trying to contact them. So there are very practical reasons around that. Owen, do you want to say anything else on that?
Sorry about that. Thanks, Martina, and hello, everybody, and thanks for coming online to what is a very important webinar. Look, the bad news out of this presentation is the life of the branch rep has just become harder, right? And there's no way of shying away from it. And indeed head office, but we've got structures and we have full-time staff and we're adjusting to it. But for lay reps who don't get paid for the job, who commit of their time to represent their members after having got elected at an AGM, this is bad news, but there is nothing we can do about it. That's the bottom line. It's not Forcep's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's, I suppose, all the way tracked back to the whole issue of transparency and accountability that we hear a lot about. These are two buzzwords that are bounced around by everybody and anybody these days. But the reality is the consequence of all of this is that there's effectively a shutdown of information to protect people's rights and entitlements. Obviously, it's the net effect too of the social media world, of the way technology has changed. And there's no way out of this, and that's the sad reality. So we have different employers, and many of them have always had good relations in the main with our trade unions, and in particular with Forcep. We have good relationships on the ground. Many of you here today, while you might argue with your bosses on the ground about various work practice issues from time to time, will probably say that nevertheless you get on with your union work and you're left get on with it, and you can take a bit of time during the day to do a bit of talking to individuals and members and sending out circulars and forwarding on emails, and that's the benign good employer. But there are other employers out there who are not so benign and not so good. And unfortunately, the changes in GDPR and the impact of GDPR is pushing all of those benign employers into the bad employer brigade. Not because they want to, but they're going to have to go there. And the HSE crash in particular is the alert that's driven every IT, and I even include Forcep in this. We've all had to dig into our systems to check them, to test their security, and to protect us from being hacked. And the net effect of all of this is the flexibility we had with our employers' email systems is, if not gone, about to be taken away from us. So Forcep had no choice but to come up with its own ways and means of protecting our data, of protecting our communications. Just one little anecdote. In 2009, when many of us, we were separate unions at that time, but some of us were involved in lightning one-day work stoppages, and one government department, which shall remain nameless, but I was General Secretary at the time, or Deputy General Secretary at the time of the CPSU, and we were launching lightning stoppages at different offices without advising the employer where they were going to be. And I can tell you absolutely that one government department knew of where those lightning stoppages were taking place well in advance of the members on the ground even knowing. And how I know that is that, and how we suspect that happened, is that that particular government department has access to our email traffic because our reps in that government department used a workplace email address for all of their communications. And I have no doubt to this day that our communications with my name on it, which were advanced private notice to branch reps to prepare for an action, that was read 2 to 3 days in advance of the action taking place. And there's nothing we could do about it, because at the end of the day, all they had to do was put a search on the IT software for Ronayne and CPSU. And I have no doubt that my email traffic was being read and passed on to management at that time. Look, it's long past, but it's an example of what is possible if they want to do it. So we've gone to this system of forcerep.ie. It's an intranet system. Basically, it's within our security firewall for the union. It is a sea change in the way reps do their work. There's no question about this. And there are changes. Those of you who are active in your branch for some time will know that there were circulars issued and that the Forcep rep was being provided on the basis of one email address per branch with no cost associated to it. The license for each email address, Forcep rep, is €60 a year, and that's an ongoing charge. There are now 100 and odd branches, 102 branches have at least one of these addresses. A number of other branches have taken additional addresses, and they have €60 per additional address removed from their branch allowance. Now, most of those branches are comfortable in terms of their branch income, but there has been a kickback and concern issued by branches, and I see in the thread the question raised about the cost. And the NEC only last month, and I'm working through the final details at the moment, and it'll go to the NEC hopefully this month for finalisation, that we will be, we've adopted a new budget for this to give 2 addresses free to each branch. And that will be an annual cost of about 24,000 to the Central Union. And there will be additional addresses there, obviously, for people who want them, and available at the license fee cost of €60 per address out of branch funds. It's not that there'll be checks asked for. The other thing the NEC has agreed to do is, and it's again one of the threads I noticed earlier, is that you can't use Forcep rep in the workplace. It's as simple as that. And the reason we can't is because of firewalls. And it gets back to my very first point, which is that employers are shutting down the systems to protect themselves. And the net effect of that is we're getting squeezed out. Yes, Forcep rep can only operate on your own laptop, desktop, if it's outside of the company firewall, or a smartphone. There's no way around this. And what the NEC has now agreed to do is to make a grant available to branches where their assets are below €5,000 in a year, because there are a number of smaller branches, and that we will assist them with €300 to purchase a Chromebook or a small tablet, which will facilitate Forcep rep being used and allow Microsoft 365, which is Word, Excel, all of that stuff, to be used as well. We've trialed a Lenovo Chromebook. I've been using it myself with a test Forcep rep address. It enables us to receive all the circular. I've been able to receive all of the circulars that come from head office, from the comms unit, the various bulletins, and to forward them on to groups of members that I have addresses for as part of the test. It's a light enough Chromebook. I think you'll all see them in PC World. You can buy them over the counter. Our IT people will set up the Forcep rep with you on that remotely and talk you through it. It's slightly different to a Microsoft PC, or the keyboard structure is slightly different, but they'll talk you through it. I've been using it now for about 2 months on test, and it works. And the idea there is that if branches don't have the wherewithal in their own funds to provide their officers with laptops or Surface tablets, which is our preferred one, and I think you can get them for about 500 quid, the Surface Go, or a laptop, you can buy them from around 350 up. They will all operate Forcep rep, and our IT people will set it up for you. It does mean, and one of the criticisms that's been made, because we've spoken to a lot of branches about it, it does mean you have to carry a laptop possibly into work with you, or you'll have to do it in your own time when you're not in the workplace. But that sad reality is there is absolutely nothing we can do about this. This is the way the world has gone. Our own security cyber advice is that we shouldn't be using workplace machines in any event, even if we are still able to use them, and a lot of places still allow us use their email addresses, because the very point that information is then sitting on a third party, an employer's database, for them to peruse and to look at, or to breach that information by inadvertently passing it to somebody else. One of the most important entitlements a member has in trade union law, in law in general, is that your membership of a trade union is a protected piece of data. In some employers, we're very fortunate in the public service that employers don't, in general, take a bad attitude to membership of a trade union. But in a lot of private sector companies, that's the last piece of information you want to pass to your employer, that we have members in a particular union. So it's a cultural change and a practical change that we're going to have to embrace. And we want to try and make it as easy as possible. So the Forcep address is now going to be available free of charge to all branches at 2 per branch. And that the branches where the money that they have in their bank account is below 5,000, the Central Union will assist them with the purchase of suitable hardware, laptops, tablets, to use that address. Its link to Solace has been mentioned, and I'll mention it here again. It is the way in which branches will be able to access their data and to become part of that network. As I said at the outset, Forcep is an intranet address. It's part of the Force domain. So in order to access Force information, you need to use a Force password and address, which is generated through our system. And that's why the Forcep will be the secure way with 2-factor authentication, i.e. mobile phone. And I use it every day. That's how I access remotely, is by using Forcep and using 2-factor authentication if I'm working remotely. So that's unfortunately where we have to go. There is no way out of this, except we are conscious of the fact that some branches have found that very difficult to fund additional addresses. 2 addresses in a smaller branch, I would have thought should work. There was a question there I noticed going along about where the setting up Gmail accounts. Yes, Gmail is more secure in terms of flexibility than a work address, but ideally it's not where we want to go because it is still an external platform. We want preferably to work using Forcep. So our encouragement is that you adopt the Forcep address. The backup, as I said, will be provided by IT. And, you know, Brendan Mulhall, who works with me, is the conduit for that information. There'll be fresh circulars going out. There's a form to be filled in by each branch, nominating the persons to use that address. And we can step that up and will be stepped up as soon as the circular goes out. I'd imagine in the next 2 weeks, there'll be a confirmation of the new system of payment and the free addresses. So rather than Gmail, Forcep is the way to go. It does involve a change of culture. It does involve a change of activity. It does make the life of the rep harder. But ultimately, we just have to adjust to this new security world of cybersecurity protection, and there's no way around it for us, unfortunately. I think I've covered it all, Martina, unless there's any other issues that people raise. Sorry, I saw a question there about, just as I'm going through, in relation to the, okay. All right, I see it there now. I'll come back to it. Yeah, two questions. I'll just deal with a question I saw there in relation to the branch issue. The comms unit doesn't look after Forcep. Forcep is looked after my department, my office, and it's comms. I haven't passed anything on, Simon, in relation to that to me, but I'll deal with you separately on it because we can get to the bottom of it. Brendan Mulhall, bmulhall at forcep.ie, is the conduit to a Forcep email address. It's not handled by comms. The comms unit.
Thanks, Owen, for that. I think it's important that we like Forcep is terribly important, and Owen has given us a great explanation on that. So thank you for that. I'm going to crack on now, and then hopefully at the end we will have time for more questions. I see there's a lot of questions coming into the chat there. So just in relation to integrity and confidentiality, I call this, but this is what in terms of you communicating with members, what I need you to do. I will talk about the data breaches in the next session, but just to say, by far the majority of data breaches that I've had to deal with are because of emails in some shape or form. An error has been made sending an email. So I would ask you, and again, I've already reiterated this earlier this morning, but if you're sending a group email, please use the BCC. If you use the CC button or the to button, what you're doing is putting everyone's name at the top of that email and their email address. And as I already said this morning, there may be members there who don't want to be identified as a Forcep member, and they're quite entitled to that right, and we need to protect that right. This is seen as a breach And I will go into later as to what I need you to do, the steps I need you to take if this does happen, but please avoid it at all costs. Now sometimes, like say for instance, you're trying to organize a meeting and people are exchanging mails in terms of a time, or you're reviewing a document, you know, in a small group, that is fine to use the to button, but you need to keep it tight. You need to keep it very tight. Again, when you're sending emails, please avoid email threads. Several of the breaches I've had is that, as we all know, threads can get very long and very cumbersome, and you forget what's at the start of the thread. So I've had a situation where a member has raised an issue, say in relation to, you know, flexible work patterns or something like that. And then the issue of flexible work patterns starts to be circulated among the branch, forgetting that the members' personal case is at the start of that thread. So you need to, again, I would avoid them. I recommend that you don't use them. But if you are using a thread, you need to just really, really check. So check the addresses that you're using, check the threads, and if you're attaching a file that has personal information in there, we would recommend that you would password protect it. Now, there may be issues around firewalls, so you might need to phone the person and just let them know that a mail is on the way. But again, you know, we are obliged, and we've had situations where the wrong email address, you know, you're distracted and you put in the wrong email address, or there's members with the same name and you send it to the wrong Martina O'Leary. If that file is protected, they don't have access to it. If it's not, we have a data breach on our hands. So just to be very aware of that. And then Owen has already mentioned this, but just in terms of, since the pandemic, really, the amount of phishing emails and scams and texts has it's just taken off. It really, really has, you know. And I suppose the first year of the pandemic, we were dealing with this, and then we've set up our cybersecurity groups, and all of the time, Forcep and every organization are looking at their firewalls, are bringing in new systems to be able to try and catch all these new scams. So it's really important to just take your time when you're reading emails. And this goes for work and for Forcep business, you know. So if it could be an unusual email from someone you have never dealt with before, or it could be an unusual email from someone you deal with all the time. We had last year, we had somebody pretending to be our General Secretary, Kevin Callahan, and one of them was a message to say you're free for a call. So all they were trying to do there was identify other people within Forcep who then they could target, you know. And if you're sitting in a meeting and you see this email come in from your boss, and if you're not really paying attention, you will respond, you know. We had another instance where Kevin Callan was supposedly asking for vouchers to be sent, which he would never ever do. But when you looked at the mail, they refer to him as the president, not the general secretary, and it was a Gmail account. So you just need to look at, you know, if you hover your mouse over the address, you'll see the real address, and it might be just one little thing, one little letter, or one little number that's off, but it's worth checking. And it's just, sometimes we just need to slow down and check this. And we all know what happened with the HSE last year. So it's an example of how bad a simple click of a link and how bad it can get because of that. So we just need to be extra careful and be vigilant, please. And I know from within Forcep, we are always reminding staff, and staff are amazing in terms of how good they are and how vigilant they are. And that's the type of atmosphere that we're trying to create all the time. It's through training and through information and through reminding people all the time to be careful. And again, this is me telling you how to suck eggs, really, you know, and the type of things and steps you need to take when you're dealing with members' information. So we all know not to leave confidential paperwork unattended. You know, you don't leave members' contact details, and you certainly don't share contact details with to a third party without their consent. But like even before GDPR, like I started my life in the trade union movement as a PA. I would never give out a member's information what you would do is you'd ring the member and say, owner names, or not owner name, but like another member is looking for you, and may I share your contact details, or here's their contact details if you want to contact them, off you go. So it's just good customer practice anyway, you know. Simple things like if you're walking away and you've got Union Business on your laptop, just lock your screen. It's the little Windows key with the 4 little squares and the L button. And just when you're moving away, and this will be policy within the union as well, we would have a clean desk, a clean screen policy. If you're moving away from your desk, or at the end of the day, just lock stuff away, just keep it secure. But you know all this. Destroy unrequired paperwork safely using a shredder. And this is important. Now, I'm not saying for one moment to destroy all paperwork, because it's really important, if there's a case or if there's an agreement, that we keep it. Okay, and members, I'll talk about this later, but members have an entitlement to put in a thing called a data subject access request. So if we have their case, and we keep case files for 7 years. So if we have a case file, the member's entitled to any personal data within that case file. So it's just, if there's extra copies of documents, or there's a draft document that has now become an official document, you shred the drafts and things like that, but please do it securely, and it should be a cross shredder, or otherwise contact Forcep offices and we can organize something for you. The last thing we want is to find personal data in a landfill site or somewhere else. So we again have a responsibility to mind that. It's really, really important. You know, obvious, you know, just don't be putting people's names or personal data on flipboards. Just take it off when you're finished. And this goes for everything here. If you have any data protection concerns, please contact me. It's dpo@forcep.ie. So that's dpo@forcep.ie. And again, I just want to talk a little bit, we've already talked about this, but just a little bit in terms of membership lists. So when Forcep was formed, each union had different systems in terms of how branches would have access to membership lists. And then with GDPR coming in as well, we had to introduce a system where branch officers would have access to a membership list. This is a bit of a cumbersome system. Once the second phase of Solus is introduced, this system will be phased out, and the plan is that through Solus, branch officers, maybe the branch secretary or the branch membership officer or the branch chair, depending on the branch, will have access to the live data that Forcep has for that branch only. So at the moment, the way to get a membership system is still this cumbersome system. What you need to do is get the form from the PA that normally deals with your branch within Forcep, fill out the form, I will have a look at it, and once it's cleared, the PA will then download the information from the membership system and send you the relevant columns within that. Obviously then there are guidelines in terms of how you keep that information safe, who sees it, you know, and what not to do to share it with a third party or anything like that. And it's also really important that when you're getting a new list, that you destroy the old list. Again, we talked earlier on about the GDPR principle of accuracy. So it's important that we keep those lists up to date, and that once you've got a new list, you just need to destroy securely the old list. And again, we've mentioned this already, but in terms of access to the new membership system, Solus, it will be through forceprep.ie, and you can appreciate why, because there's so much information there of members. Some branches have, you know, huge membership, but no matter be it a small branch or a big branch, it's important that we protect those lists, and we're obliged to do so under GDPR as well. But you know, anyone that's joining any organization wants to know that their data is being kept secure, be it a bank, be it a trade union, be it a building society. I just want to say a little bit about personal cases. And again, myself and Owen have referred to this, but members have an entitlement to confidentiality. and members have an expectation of confidentiality. So if you or me go to our union rep with a personal case, and generally you'll find that, you know, when there's a personal case, it's not the first thing they do. The member has thought about this a lot, you know, and it's generally a big step to go to their union rep. So, and it's something that's bothering them, it's causing them sleepless nights, and it's causing them stress. So they want to know that only the people within the union that need to know the details of their case see that case. So it wouldn't be appropriate that details of a case would go to a branch committee, okay? It may be appropriate to say, you know, we're dealing with 7 personal cases at the moment, and the issues are A, B, C, D, and E, but you wouldn't generally go in to the details of the case, okay? Obviously, it may need to be shared with another branch officer if that branch officer is going to be dealing with the case, and then with, you know, with union staff and things like that. But again, it's appropriate personnel, and it's an operational reason and a need-only basis. Again, I'm telling you how to suck eggs here. You need to keep the file secure. In terms of, we keep personal cases for 7 years. Agreements and things like that you need to keep for prosperity, so that we know that the agreements are in place. And it's really important that, you know, branch officers and branch reps leave for whatever reason during the year, or then during election time as well. There may be a changeover in officership. It's important to remember that this information is Forcep information. You know, this belongs to the trade union, and we are the data controller there. So it's really, really important that when a member, a branch officer or a branch rep has, you know, particularly members' cases, but has documentation belonging to the branch, that it's handed over to the incoming branch secretary or chairperson or the appropriate person. And if for some reason that's not possible, that it's handed back to the appropriate Forcep office. But just remember that that information does belong to the union, and it's appropriate that it's passed on. And just to say, Forcep has a whole host of policies in terms of data protection. So we have a data protection policy. I've already referred to the data privacy statement. We have a SARS request. It's a data subject access request. Generally, I don't ask people to fill out a form for a SARS request. And the reason for that is it's easier to have a conversation and tease out exactly what they're looking for, because otherwise they're going to be bombarded with paper, we're going to be bombarded with paper, and it's making it more difficult to just get to exactly what the member is looking for. And that's what we would generally do. And just to say, in terms of resources for branches, at the bottom of the Forcep website, there is a data protection section. And if you click on that, there's a whole host of very short training videos. And we're hoping that we will get this one up there as well. But there are training videos, there are guidelines in terms of what branches should be doing. So we'd encourage you at some stage just to have a look at that, or to refer other branch committee members or branch officers to the website. There's a lot of resources there, including the guidelines for branches. And there's also guidelines in terms of the membership list and how the membership list should be handled. And I have here, as one of my first jobs I did as data protection officer was to get rid of autocomplete and Outlook for Forcep, which made me extremely popular, as you can imagine. And we also have a data retention policy that would look at everything in detail and say how long we need to keep that information for. I've already mentioned briefly privacy by design and default, but just to reiterate it, that if we're introducing new technologies, we need to there's a whole range of things that we need to do: a risk assessment, due diligence, maybe a legitimate interest assessment if we're using legitimate interest as a lawful basis. But if we are obliged to do this, and if we would do a DPIA, that would highlight risks, and we would need to come up with mitigations, how we mitigate against those risks. If we cannot mitigate, then we may be obliged to bring in the Office of the Data Protection Commission. But generally, you can come up with mitigations. There's always a way to fix a problem and to make systems secure. In relation to data retention, I've already said that in terms of personal case files, we keep them for 7 years, okay? Again, if it's an active case file, you'd use common sense and you wouldn't get rid of it because it's important, obviously it's active, that you wouldn't do that. In terms of collective agreements, you would keep them permanently. Application forms, we generally keep them for 7 years. The consent part of the application form we keep permanently, because if the employer is deducting from source, we need to be able to prove that you have given consent for that. In terms of deleting members' files, it may be a good idea if you are shredding files, again, to be done confidentially on a cross shredder, that you give the member the option to say, we have your file here, and do you, we're going to shred it now, it's past the 7 years. Do you want it? And that is a good way to deal with that. And again, I've already said, but just in terms of incoming elected branch officers, if there's a change of personnel, that the files need to be passed forward to or passed on to the incoming branch officers, because the information is Forcep's. Again, I've already mentioned, and it is important, that we're only as good as the information we hold is only as good as the information we're given. So if a member changes their contact details or changes their address, it's important that they give us that. And again, sort of the final stage of SOLAS, the membership system, is that each member will have access to a member's portal, and they will have the facility to update and change their contact details. But we're a little bit away from that yet, but that is the ultimate goal. And once that is there, that will hopefully help greatly in terms of members having the ability to control the contact details that we have for them. But again, we would encourage people to, like say last year, there was a huge drive because there was a national ballot taking place to get members and to get branches to update their contact information, and there was an absolute massive job in terms of that. But it's important that it's ongoing and that people are encouraged to update their details as much as possible. And again, there's issues around, should we be using work addresses and email addresses, or personal email addresses? We've gone into that in detail, but again, it's been important to encourage people to use their personal email addresses if possible. I'm not sure how I am on time. I think I'm okay, but
you
again,
have time, Martina, and we have a few questions to go back over, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've been keeping a note. Owen has been answering some questions in the chat, but there were one or two from this morning as well to go through. So anyone I don't mention, it's because I've seen that Owen has addressed it in the chat already, so there is no need to go through it. But one of the questions is that if you're emailing elected branch reps in a branch, do you need to use BCC? So there was a similar question from somebody else saying, can you advise on a small group such as a branch committee, can you use the to function if you get members of that branch executive committee to opt in?
I suppose my advice is, if you can at all, if it doesn't make life difficult for you, I would suggest that you use the BCC or use the BCC button to avoid the to. Generally, what I do, if I'm sending out something to staff, I will use the BCC button, and I would just put at the top of the email, sent to, and the group that you've sent it to. But sometimes from an operational point of view, from a practical point of view, as I said earlier, like if you're reviewing a document or there's feedback required, when you're going to have to use the to button, or the CC button, because people are going to have to give the responses, and you're going to need to make decisions. But best avoided sometimes, and again, keep that group very small and very tight. I hope that addresses the question.
There was a similar question as well of a wider group. I took it as a group of elected workplace reps within a branch executive, and could you use the to function there? And I think exactly what you've said, which is that's quite a large group, and I suppose you are leaving yourself open to a lot of potential areas of issue if you don't use the BCC.
Yeah, it really is important, and again, we're trying to protect everybody here, and consent, somebody can give consent one day and then decide, no, I'm not happy with that, I want to withdraw that. And then how do you deal with that when the horses has bolted as such, so there are issues around that. So if we can keep it tight, if it's working for you, please keep it tight. And if there's an issue, come and talk to me and see if we can have a workaround. But it is better to use the BCC button if we can at all.
And then just to go back on the archive information, there was a specific question about former and retired members' data as being retained and how best should a local rep deal with this. And there was mention of a 10-year time frame, and I presume the timelines that you outlined in the presentation are what branch representatives should also be using locally. And the question kind of at the end of that, I suppose, was, is there a way for branches to be able to transfer any data into an internal Forcep portal, or how do you see that being managed?
Well, at the moment, like Forcep HQ doesn't have a sort of, hasn't put all of our information into soft copy yet, and it will be a project that we will be doing, but to be honest, it's a little way off. So that's the ideal in terms of branches uploading information and giving it to us, but we're not close to it yet. And it would be something that I would be aiming towards, and it's not to fudge the question. Case files and things like that, really 7 years, obviously from treasurers and that. There's financial legislation that would say that all financial stuff needs to be kept for 7 years, and all treasurers would have been trained in that anyway. If there's an issue around storing stuff, come and maybe have a chat with me or have a chat with your official and see if we can sort something out. But the last thing we want, if we are getting rid of information, that it needs to be done in a secure and a structured way. As I said, we don't want to end up finding information in inappropriate places.
And just on that, Martina, somebody mentioned around keeping information for 7 years. If it's a short query, for example, somebody was asking, something about bank holidays or leave, or it was a kind of a short, quick query. Is there any way to keep that?
No, I don't think so. Like it's when you're representing a member, really, and some branches do represent members, other branches they don't, and it'll be Forcep staff that would do that. So different advice refers to different branches. But if branches do deal with case files, and there is a particular case file, that has sort of taken legs and has grown, and you're representing a member, it would probably be appropriate. We would keep those for 7 years. And then if there's a legal case, if the member is not happy with the representation that the union has given, or they feel that they're going to take a legal claim, the time frame will be within the 7 years. It would be important to have the file for that reason as well.
And then a specific question, is it okay for me as a branch treasurer and workplace rep to share our workplace membership list with another branch executive committee member who is not a branch rep?
It goes down to lawful basis. Why would you be sharing that list with them? So say if that branch executive member has a function in terms of maybe they're the membership secretary, and they are looking at who the members are, and you're doing a mapping exercise because you want to see where there are potential members or who your retired members are. Yes, because there's a lawful basis, they have a job to do. So if that executive member has a job to do or is communicating with members about a particular issue, well then yes. If they don't have a lawful basis, if there's no good reason as to why they need the access to the membership list, the answer is no. So it's on a case-by-case basis, really. So there isn't a one size fits all. It depends on the circumstances.
And then, sorry now to jump back to archiving information, Martina, but somebody's come in here. If the case data and the copies have all been given to the official, can the branch destroy any local copies they have, as the official has the documents if there's a query? So it's really about duplicate copies of a case file.
I think again, common sense needs to come in here, and I think, you know, before you shred a file, a conversation with the union official or whomever you have shared that information with, to say, you know, I'm getting rid of this stuff now, because what if the union official says, "Nash, the branch has that," and they shred them as well, you know? So just a bit of communication between, we're archiving our stuff now and we're going through the documentation, and are you happy with that? So I think that's what I would suggest happens.
So one final question there, unless anybody wants to put something else into the chat. I think everything has been covered off, even by either by Martina's presentation, Owen's responses to some of the questions. Mark is saying we have distribution lists for different sections with members' work email addresses. Is it preferable to use personal email lists in the distribution list instead? And I think the answer to that from Martina and Owen has been yes. You know, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Martina.
The answer, Linda, is right, is yes, and we would encourage members to get to, when they're signing up, to give their personal email addresses. But you know, there are hundreds and thousands of members that we don't have personal email addresses for, and that's a job of work that we need to do. So if the workplace address is the only one we have, well then you probably have no choice but to use that one. But we'll be encouraging members to change that, and particularly when phase 3 of Solas comes in, we will be encouraging members to put in their private email addresses.
And then one last question came in under the wire there as you were chatting, Martina, from Simon saying, if branches want to contact other branches, what's the process?
I suppose there isn't a process at the moment, and there isn't an official process at the moment, let's put it like that. There obviously has been for years and years and years networks of members, as members meet in a conference and other events, and I suppose COVID has taken that away a little bit. But in terms of generally, you know, branches have voluntarily swapped contact details, and that's fine. But that's different to the data controller sending out email addresses belonging to branch secretaries. As I've already said, we do not have a lawful basis to do that at the moment, but informally, if both branch secretaries are happy to do that, that's up to themselves.
I think that's where as well, DEC, you know, knowing who your DEC, your local divisional executive committee members are, is really important, because that is where a lot of branches would network at a divisional level within.
And can I just say something on that, Linda? Like, say for instance, when branch officers are going for election, and particularly people going for, you know, DECs and union officer positions, they're given a thing called I mentioned it earlier, called a privacy notice. So if a candidate is successful for elected, they'll be told, well, this is what's going to happen with your information. So some of your information will be shared, you know, but that's say for instance in May that there will be elections for president and vice president and possibly treasurer. So those candidates have been given that privacy statement to say, if you are successful, this is what's going to happen with your information. They would have received that already. So I hope that clarifies that a bit. So we're just a little bit past our official break time. So we're coming up to 12 o'clock. If we could at all possible be back by 12:15, please, for the last session, and then we'll hope to finish quite promptly at 1 o'clock. And again, thank you for keeping with us, because it is a heavy subject. You know, it's very difficult to make it airy and light, because it isn't. So I appreciate you sticking with us, and if you're back at 12:15, please. Thank you.